we have a great Foley artist with us. He is Matt Davis. It's going to be called Sound from Scratch, and Matt is actually going to be showing us some amazing tricks and tools from his toolbox, and I can't wait to let you see what happens. Let's just say that after today's masterclass, you will be viewing movies and hearing sound in a little different way. So, with that note, I just would like to plug our film festivals really quickly. So, don't forget, you still have time to watch a lot of our amazing films on watch.bushwickfilmfestival.com. It is a secured streaming platform which is sponsored by Amazing Spectrum. So don't forget to support our talented filmmakers around the globe and also locally. Okay. Other than that, do check out our bios for all the amazing panelists that we have, because I don't think a one line can do justice to their amazing filmography. So, with that note, I am going to be bringing Matt Davis on board. Matt.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, Matt's here. So, Matt, please take it away, and I'm here if you need me.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Davies. I'm a Foley artist. I'm also a supervising sound editor and sound designer. So I am on the Foley Stage here in Burbank, California, and I'm just going to switch camera. We have a camera A, camera B going so that you can see the stage a little better. So here we go, camera B. So this is our Foley Stage, and you can see right now this is way messier. I would call this the natural state of the Foley Stage. But as you can see, we were in the middle of doing a project that entailed a whole bunch of random things. So the kind of clean state of the Foley Stage doesn't have all of this kind of clutter that you can see back here and off to the side. Everything gets kind of stowed away. But instead of kind of presenting it to you in a what I would consider unnatural state, which is clean and tidy and all that stuff, I left it kind of au naturel here. So what I find really fun about showing people, you know, kind of a messy Foley stage is that you get a glimpse of kind of the methodology and workflow process that goes into shooting Foley for a film. So you can kind of see how I picked things, how I organized things. You know, if you can make out any details over this, you know, obviously you can see all of these solo cups here. There's some kind of miscellaneous like wooden bowls and bits of paper and boxes and chairs. And why is this chair on this surface and stuff like that? Why is there a cello there? Why doesn't it have a neck? All of these things. So, you know, really, you know, as a Foley artist, I collect garbage for the most part. I consider it things that are discarded from people. They don't maybe have too much of a life anymore. I'll switch cameras so that I'm not talking away from you here. But they don't have a you know, a life anymore in terms of being useful as their you know, original kind of goal. Like I have a burnt out light bulb sitting over here that you know, I've used for like the sound of a softball. So it has kind of a nice bright sound on the top here, and then if we kind of, you know, hit this kind of matte, kind of hard, dense part at the bottom where it probably has most of the circuitry and diodes or whatever LEDs have, you know, it has different tones. But this, you know, is a useless item that would have been destined to go to a landfill or go into recycling or something like that. So you tend to be a bit of a pack rat when you're a Foley artist because you see the kind of sonic potential in everything. So it's much like this room is kind of filled with stuff. That's more or less how your brain works as a Foley artist, is you see things as kind of the materials and sound that they can possibly create. So you know, to give kind of a brief overview of what Foley is, for those of you who might not be familiar or need a bit of like clarification between what is Foley art and what is you know, sound effects and other things, because there's a lot of overlap and they can get confused. Foley art specifically is the act of performing sound effects that happen on screen live. So the same way that you need to do things like ADR, which is replacing dialogue if it's been recorded poorly or there are noise issues from set, it's the same principle. You recreate that action and those sounds live in a room, and you are, 99% of the time following picture. And that's the most important part of this, especially when we are story-driven people. Like I'm less of a technical person and more of a story-based, emotional kind of person when it comes to approaching sound. So for me, it's not just that we need to get these footsteps covered. It's how do we need to cover these footsteps? What are the footsteps trying to convey? And I think that's the interesting thing a lot of the time, is that some of these sound effects can feel very pedestrian. And when you start treating them as being thematic tools, that's when your storytelling as a filmmaker and as a sound artist really start to kind of flourish, is that you're treating everything with this significance. So if you think about it, when you have that kind of, pedigree of creativity from the script process all the way through to post sound and finishing, that means that every step of the process has some kind of emotionality to it that feeds in. So even if some of the sound, and most of the time Foley is mixed very low, borderline subliminal, you just want to feel it. And that's a thing that often comes up, is feeling instead of hearing it. But when the feel of it is done with emotion and it's done with the characters in mind and the film in mind, that's when things really start to kind of gel and help bring home all the work that's been put into making a film, be something the audiences want to see. So a good example of that is I was doing a film a few years ago called Between Us, and there's a character in it that we never saw her shoes. And she was kind of supposed to be a bit of like a punk character, shaking things up in the lives of one of the characters. And she was, she had short hair. She was a bit edgy. And she was always wearing kind of like, sundresses and things like that. And so if you characterized her just based on the rest of her wardrobe, when going through and making the decisions of, what needed, what should we give her shoes? What should we make her shoes be, right? You would maybe characterize her look or the dress that she was wearing or other clothes, and make assumptions maybe, or it would be easy to make assumptions. Maybe she's wearing flats, maybe she's wearing sandals, stuff like that. That would have been the very easy kind of call to make. And what I realized is that her character in the film was somebody who is disrupting the life of the supposedly happily married guy in the film, while he was kind of exploring how he felt about kind of leaving his life, being more kind of avant-garde and all of this stuff. And every time she kind of came into his life or was around, there was that disruption. And she was kind of always challenging things and stuff like that. And at some point we were just about to shoot her, and I was like, I don't want to do flats. I feel like we have the opportunity. We never see her feet. Maybe we should just make a creative call to do something else. And I was on the East Coast at that point. The director was on the West Coast, and it was like 8:30 a.m. or 8 a.m. his time or whatever. And I shot him a text, and I was like, hey, can we give her like Doc Martens or something? Can we give her like really like heavy, hard boots instead of like flats or anything else? Because I just think like it would be great to hear her coming. Like she's when we hear kind of these boots, we know that she's coming. Even though we never see it, we can kind of like start pinning this character on it. And he was totally into the idea and loved it. And it did help because it made her sound more imposing in those scenes with him. And we made him sound kind of a little more shy with his footsteps in order to get him kind of sounding more demure and everything. So she always kind of had the upper hand or power in the kind of sonic relationship between the two people. And so I think it's funny because a lot of people can kind of make fun of footsteps and fun of kind of some of these details and be like, it's just, you know, they just need to be covered. And it's like, there's missing opportunities. That's what I see in every cue we're given. I'm like, this is an opportunity to do something. Obviously with Foley, you know, there's kind of two lives to it. There's that side of it, which is the creative side. And I always think it's creative. And then there is the technical side of things, which is like, we do need to get things covered. We need to do kind of M&E style Foley. So the music and effects for like a foreign dub or something like that, where all the dialogue gets stripped out of the domestic version. And then we have to go back in and, you know, fill all the places where the production effects or the sounds that occurred in the original production sound that were things like footsteps or props or whatever else get stripped away when the original dialogue goes away from set. So we have to go back in and we have to fill all of those missing things that were there in the domestic version only because of the dialogue, if that makes sense, right? Yeah, so it's a lot of work. So if you think about it, and that's the thing, it's like if you plug your ears and then kind of like, you know, look at a scene of people, even if you're outside just people watching and you're not, you know, or maybe indoors instead of outdoors because you have less noise to compete with. But if you look at all the details happening, that's very much how we watch films, is I'm scanning and I'm chasing all of these details. And so it can become this kind of visual cacophony of like, okay, well, if we do everything on screen and everything's audible, it's not going to play, right? So you have to kind of make these decisions to try and focus what's on screen and pick the things that are priority. And I'm always kind of looking towards the mixing process. Like, okay, we can do, you know, all of the things that we see on screen, but is that what's needed? Is that what the best, you know, method of process is to tell this story? Probably not, you know, it probably needs to be focused a little bit. So when we're looking for storytelling devices, we're thinking about footsteps, and we're thinking about, you know, the kind of tonality of all these props. So it's like I've got, you know, I'm trying to find a few things on hand. So I have this old camera here, which, you know, is great, and but it's got all kinds of like really nice metal bits on it, and you know, the hardware compared to modern day technology is boring. Everything's a screen, everything's a really soft button. You know, this is a prop. It's sad that an iPhone that used to cost an arm and a leg is now a Foley prop, but you know, this is how I make phone sounds these days. It's really boring. Maybe I get the occasional excitement of a button click or something, but it's really boring. So you take this older technology and it's just got all of this great stuff. And this guy especially, I'm gonna get the right side up here, this old Polaroid. So that flips down, this comes out. And so you've got all these kind of machinations and things. So the value in something like this for me is incredibly high, because all of these little details on it, little buttons and jangly bits, and you know, that cool guy right there, there's a world of opportunities with sound. So when you know, look at a room that's kind of filled with stuff, it's like all of the stuff in here has that kind of value to it, where it's like we really, you know, the second life of things can be very strong, the kind of more you know, the more complex some of these props can be. So the process, just to kind of circle back a little bit, as I tend to talk kind of a mile a minute in stream of consciousness here, the process of kind of deciding what gets Foleyed happens fairly early in the process. So if I'm working with a supervising sound editor, or I am the supervising sound editor on a project, typically during the kind of early phase of, you know, if we're lucky, maybe we come on early enough that we have a script. Maybe the film hasn't been shot yet, and that's the best, because that means that I can kind of get a direct tap in. to the kind of filmmaker's process. I tend to, if I'm supervising a film, I enjoy that because it gives me kind of an extra level of insight. Foley, sometimes it can be a little bit conflicting because I don't want to make a whole bunch of initial decisions or get attached to things how they might be, and then once we see the film, have to backtrack. So it's, it can be more like, beneficial just to wait until the film is there and then see it, right? Anyway, so as we're kind of assessing the script and doing things like that, we are making those decisions. We go into the filmmaking process. We finally see the results of the shooting and editing, and then we start to determine, what needs to be Foleyed and what doesn't. There are obvious things. We always know that we're going to be covering footsteps. We always know that Foley really excels at doing nuanced physical actions. So an example might be like a cloth pat. We do a lot of those, right? All the time. And that's a very technical thing for the most part. We're doing that in filling for things like M&Es, where it's like you see somebody, patting or putting their hand on their leg, if they're like gesturing and then they put their hands down. Those are very kind of straightforward things. And there is a lot of art to that. If I use the palm of my hand, I'm going to get a much more smacky sound because that's a flat surface area. So things are coming together like a clap. Same thing happens with footsteps, and I'll try and demo it. But the difference between a shoe that doesn't have a tread at all and a shoe that has a very flat surface like a Converse, the Converse type sole or like a skater sole is always going to give you a very kind of smacky, high-end kind of clap, right? So if you think about somebody like on a skateboard jumping off and having to kind of run to not fall over, it's always like bat, 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 right? So if you replace that kind of a sole with something that's more like a hiking shoe, all of those little nodules in the bottom for grip, all of those can't find anything, have airspace in between them. So that breaks up the sound and it just becomes about the kind of weight of the shoe and the tread. So it's the same thing with things like that. So if I do like that kind of a thing, right? If somebody's grabbing somebody's arm, it sounds smacky. And when it gets recorded over the microphone, sometimes it can sound just like a pop, not like an actual grab. So what we'll do instead is I'll use like my fingers more for the grab so that it gets a little bit more, there we go. It gets a little bit more weight to it. I don't know if that translates over the microphone for this at all, but you end up getting that. So, but those things can be very technical. So there's a chance that, in some cases, those types of things can, could in theory come from a library, right? Ideally, it's just all Foleyed. But the thing where Foley really excels is on kind of the like really kind of fussy, nuancy things. So if somebody is like taking an old piece of money, so I have like a piece of brown paper bag here that's kind of weathered. I've scrunched it up, unscrunched it, kind of done the vending machine trick, rolling it over like surfaces to get it to flatten back out again. Things like this, where somebody's like holding it and they're maybe moving a lot and they're doing all of these kind of little gestures and things. This is a real pain to cut from a library. All of these little details, and especially if it's a quiet moment or a quiet film, you have more of that silence to kind of work with, but it also gives the audience more opportunities to pick things apart if they're not perfect. So when you have a quiet film, often the quiet films end up being, I find, harder than a louder film because you have nothing to hide behind. We're doing a short right now, no music, barely any dialogue, and it's indoors. And so it's really, you can hear a pin drop and it's great because it means that we have total control over how everything's sounding. But at the same time, if you're trying to do a longer cue and your stomach growls, cue's ruined, start over or punch in for that little section. So you're holding your breath constantly in those films, right? So it's very different. I profoundly think that running in high heels on gravel is easier than doing a cloth Rustle pass for a quiet film, because you know, I can only control kind of nature so much. I can only control my stomach growls so much, or a plane flying over the building so much, right? So these kinds of things, you know, mean that you have to be kind of like, you know, walking on eggshells constantly. So this isn't the kind of it's rustly, but it's what I would call dark. It's a dark rustle. It's kind of a bit more kind of rustic sounding. If you have something like this is prop movie money, not real money. It still tricks me every time. I'm like, I'm rich. And then it's just paper, disappointingly. But this is a much more kind of, you know, lively, and you can hear my kind of fingers rustling on it. So that's one thing you have to be very careful as a Foley artist, how you're touching things, because it matters. So if I rustle too much like that, and the character is doing this, all of those rustles don't have a place to be. So it's not the right performance, right? So we kind of determine what needs to be Foley, what doesn't need to be Foley. In an ideal world, we know that we're going to Foley most of the things in the film. So a good kind of Foley package we might do. On average, we're doing 5 days of Foley for a feature film. So that's, you know, all footsteps, props, cloth, things like that. For something where we get to where maybe it's more demanding, or we get to really like fill out the world, you know, it might end up being like 9 days or more. So you have like the very big blockbuster films are obviously like shooting for a couple of weeks, maybe, or several. So for indie, I work a lot in indie. You know, it can be between like 5 and 10 days. And that gives you, all on the higher end, it gives you a lot of opportunity to not just do the things that need to get done for the film, but also experiment. And that is huge. We're going to experiment anyway, right? I'm always bringing things in. There's always kind of a buffer of like, you know, it's like a Goodwill. Like there's an area that I hold all the stuff that's being processed before it kind of comes in to the Foley stage and gets organized. And that is a big part of the experimentation process. So, but ideally on a film, we have that experimentation time to do that. Getting back to like how we do it, when we finally get a cut of the film in, a Foley editor typically goes through the thing. I'll assess it as well, just to see if I need any specific things and just to kind of get in tune. But a Foley editor will go through and cue. So a Foley editor or a Foley cuer will go through, determine where all the places are in the timeline that need to get cued. And typically in Pro Tools, we'll drop these clips across the timeline that all have a pretty rigid naming convention so that we can search for them quickly and so that it keeps it organized. So as we generate all of those little clips across the timeline, and picture like an editorial timeline or a sound editorial timeline with all the little sound effect clips everywhere, video clips everywhere, looks the same. It's the same thing. They're just blank and they're named, you know, whatever, prop, gun, handle, or something like that, right? So we fill up that timeline. And so if you think about all the little things that need to get done in a film, all of those individual things need their own clip. And then it's not as simple as just like, oh, he grabs a gun and points it at somebody. Let me grab my gun, actually. So we have a prop gun here. It's completely non-firing. That doesn't even have a hollow barrel. It's filled in. But if you think about the act of grabbing a gun and pointing it, right? I can do it as a kind of a one take, a one layer take, right? So I can do, right, pointing it, but that doesn't give us a lot of control over the sound that's being recorded, because this is quite a loud sound of grabbing. And then this is a softer sound, the rattle, by comparison. So even though it could just be one cue, and sometimes we'll do one cue to get what I would call maybe a more naturalistic recording, and that can often benefit things like documentaries or films that are a little bit more raw in their sound. You know, we'll do kind of the single taker where it's like all the broken apart layers that we might otherwise do kind of in one take, and we try to kind of get it natural, right? So that the mic picks everything up in one shot, the kind of natural way that you would hear it, you know, on location. However, that doesn't give you a lot of flexibility. So if you think about it, when you have a very loud sound followed by a quiet sound, and you see that waveform, it's a very large waveform followed by a quiet one. And by the time you get to the mixing process and you have thousands upon thousands of sounds that might look like that, if you as a director, or you're an editor or producer or whatever, go, hey, can we turn up the gun rattle? Not having that gun rattle separate from that hit means that then the mixer has to go through and find kind of the ends and draw those up, which is fine, but it takes longer. So what we kind of aim to do instead is record things in kind of layers. If we think that, and we assume most of the time, that ease of navigation for the mixer in the final end of the process is kind of needed. So what we'll do is we'll do a grab separately. So that's one. We'll do a little bit of the handling rattle too. And then maybe there's like an extra kind of bump that we want to do, at the end there. So that's 3. Maybe they cock the gun. That's another one. That's 4. And maybe they fire it. That's 5. So that ends up being 5 different layers for a sound that you'd otherwise say is one sound, right? So you can see how quickly that starts to multiply. So we cue everything out, and it might end up being that we get through 300 to 400 cues in a day, and over 5 days, so it becomes a lot. And then all of that stuff has to get kind of synced back up again, because even if my timing's pretty good, I'm only human. It's always going to be kind of like off just a little bit, half second late maybe. So everything needs to get kind of pulled back and then kind of sunk back up. And then that might, I might do a balance, or my mixer might do a kind of balance of all of that stuff so that the cloth is not super loud next to the footsteps, and we'll get everything kind of mixed. And then that'll potentially go to the soup after that, right? So what's really helpful about that is that we kind of then hand it off as a full package. Like, here are all the effects, all the natural effects that we've recorded in Foley. And then that gets integrated into the hard effects, which are cut from library and other things. So by the end of the process, it's one part of this whole, and depending on the kind of film that you're doing, it's going to be bigger in proportion or not, right? So it might end up being, for a quiet film that's very minimal with dialogue, and it's lots of kind of introspective kind of filmmaking, Foley might be, a really massive part of the cinematic kind of sound for it, versus an action film where it's just kind of coming in at different times to kind of help support things, right? So it really kind of depends on the project. But once it's all done and mixed, then it lives there, and it kind of provides that like tactile feel for everything in the film. So I think before we go to Q&A here, I'm going to show a couple of props that I really like. So I'm going to switch to this. So I'll show them first. So we'll start with something kind of simple, but man, it's a part of the process. So these are my favorite shoes, favorite Foley shoes, right? Just standard black heels. And the reason why they're my favorite is because I look at everything as an instrument. And so there are some instruments in here that aren't very good instruments. They take a lot of coercion to make sound good. If the humidity is different or the heat's different, they sound less than ideal. So anything that provides a really consistent sound that's good, I consider like, the most expensive Fender, Stratocaster ever made, Jimi Hendrix's Stratocaster, whatever. It's like, the really reliable kind of main instrument, right? So in terms of the footsteps, think shoes like this are incredibly valuable because of the kind of, consistent sound that they make. And I'm going to switch over here. So you can hear like, right? So this is kind of the concrete surface that I use for everything, which is the foundation. It's a little bit more rough back here as some concrete is poured, right? So we really want that kind of consistency there. And you can see over, well, you can't actually see over there too much, but on the A cam, we have our kind of wall of shoes here. And I'll pan it just a little bit. Nope, wrong direction, right? So we've got some shoes hanging up here, more heels there. They're awful. but all of these surfaces that we walk on correspond to things. So we've got this kind of creaky wood floor surface here, our dirt pit, which is actually all the way into kind of the foundation. So we cut through the foundation, got to real dirt. I think it sounds great. Does it sound better than, you know, a concrete kind of pit that ends up, you know, getting filled with dirt? It might be by a small margin that it actually does sound that much better, but it's that peace of mind that this is kind of the real sound, and then we kind of add to that, and we have to add different things. So another great prop here, just a little bit more complicated to handle. I made for a film that I'm going to shamelessly plug because it's a good one. Film just premiered on Shudder called the Mortuary Collection, and it's a really imaginative anthology horror film. And we had some kind of big challenges in that film, and one of them was a kind of demonic stomach growl. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make stomach growls artificially. I recorded my own stomach, which was disappointing, and all this stuff. And I finally came up with this kind of bag of goo in a silicone thing that if I can get it to sound good, a little treat here. Right. So it's really, if you can hear that, it's a really kind of great kind of instrument because it's making these performative sounds that really kind of add this kind of otherworldly growl to this. And then one last prop here before we move on, let me get this guy sorted, is a much more kind of simple prop that it's one of those things that you just, you know, you find by kind of experimenting with things and just trying all the options. So I was at a thrift store with my wife and she like popped around the corner and had this. I was like, what the heck is this? And I think it's like a pot holder, right? And she knows you know, my Foley side. So she's always kind of handling things and listening to things when we're shopping together. And it's got this great, kind of repetitive squeaky sound. And it's all because of how it's built. It's got these little wood handles, right? So when the metal kind of resonates as things are going, there we go. Those resonances in the metal then go into the wood and then make they're acting as more of a resonator to provide more body and tone to the sound that would otherwise maybe be a bit thin because it was just metal rods and everything. So, and the less pressure I put on that, the more that they kind of sustain. So we're always kind of listening for things like that. But as I showed you, you know, the layout of the room, and then we can move to the Q&A. We've got surfaces for things like, you know, footsteps. We've got kind of a water pit that's like hanging out underneath this. You can see kind of the entrance to it there. It's like sloping down underneath, going this way. Yeah, there we go. So that's for surfaces and things like that. And then all of our props kind of back here, and there are more around to the side. Our sink, which is also kind of back there behind the TV. So we can, you know, easily access things like water quite quickly, or if we need to do like watering, you know, plants, Foley or something like that, we can do that. And then I showed you the shoes on that side. So you can really never have enough stuff, which is why we're kind of constantly collecting things and adding things in. And then there's curtains on this side, which also help tune the acoustics of the room. So if we need to kind of liven things up a little bit and make it sound like it's in a warehouse, we draw the curtains and then things become a little bit more acoustically accurate to what we're seeing on screen. So I think we can move on to the Q&As now, if you'd like.
I love it, Matt. This is brilliant. That studio is so cool.
Yeah, it's we built this back in gosh, it's been a blur because of COVID, but yeah, it was last fall. Yeah, we opened it. It was live last September. So it's constantly changing. I've added a lot of things since kind of opening it and everything. But yeah, it's a great space.
It's brilliant. I love it. And we have been like, a lot of people have been commenting on how amazing that is. I'm pretty sure we'll be all listening and watching movies totally differently now. We'll be like, how was that created?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of an arc where films become ruined for you, and then it comes back around to you loving them more, because when you hear a really, really well done mix for a film, design for a film, Foley for a film, you don't necessarily notice it, but I know when you're looking for it and you know that you're watching something good, it's a treat, and especially once you start to get to know films from multiple Foley or multiple films from the same people, you start to kind of recognize kind of the character to that, which I think is so important. Is like it's not just a bunch of junk in a room with mics and things like that. It's like we are meticulous in trying to find what our sound is. Like everybody is searching for their own sound, and so we've spent a lot of time picking the right equipment, picking the right rooms, picking the right props to kind of do things that are pleasing to us. Like if I don't like the way something sounds, it's like I don't want to do it. That's not. It needs to sound good. We need to be getting something out of it while we're doing it, to know that the audience has a chance of also getting something out of it. So
Absolutely. You put it in the best possible way. So we do have some questions over here, Matt. You probably will be seeing a few more because unfortunately I had a technical difficulty. So I was like in and out for a tad bit. The first question that I see on here is, hi, Matt. It's from Alex Milne. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. Hi, Matt. Do you do both Foley performance and engineering? I assume there is Booth there somewhere, but seems to be just you. The technicality you refer to often requires constant creative decision by a recording engineer. Mic selection, placement, baffling, and post segmentation, layering. Oh, somebody knows their sound here. Sound effects, and so on. How involved or aware are you in the technical creative decisions versus performative decisions? Such a question. Do we have time to answer this?
Yeah, it's actually a really pretty simple question. Or simple answer, I guess. I'm well versed in the entire process. I was a sound designer. I've done production sound, but I was a sound designer and the supervising sound editor before I became a Foley artist. And now I still oscillate between the three things. But you have to know a bit of both, or at least how both sides work, in order, I think, to do your job well. And I think this applies to anything. I think even it applies to directors. I think to be a good director, you need to understand that at the very least that sound is important, and make the decisions to make sure that it is treated as if it's importantly, right? So the same thing for me. It's not me just playing in a room. It's me being critical of the recording process. And I do work with a mixer. Foley is always a two-person process if done properly. It is me as the Foley artist, and it is my Foley mixer. Everybody's trying to phase out engineer in this industry because it doesn't mean anything. We're not, pushing buttons and, reading charts and stuff. We didn't have to get an engineering degree. We are artists, mixers, designers, everything. So when my Foley mixer and I are working together, and the case Sharon, for example, Sharon is the ears of the film more than I am, because she's hearing how it's getting recorded. And I always have to be aware of that. So I might be, it might be a long day, and I may be like, I think this sounds fine, let's move that. And she's like, no, there's a low thing. We need to do it differently. So she'll be like, pop on your headphones. So I'll pop on my headphones and listen to what she's hearing, and I'll go, yeah, you're right, sorry. And I'll do it differently to kind of make those consolidations. So you have to be aware of the process for that. I built this space, not physically speaking, but I designed the space. I picked the equipment. I tested the equipment. The old setup was equipment that I had been using for years prior. So I knew it. I sourced the preamp based on research, the preamp that the mic goes into in order to get into Pro Tools. I sourced that. I sourced the audio interface. And part of that is because I'm making the sounds. I want to make sure that the sounds that I'm making are getting into Pro Tools through the right equipment. The same way that people pick amplifiers, if they pick, you know, guitar strings or anything else to find their sound, it's the same thing. So you do have to be aware of the process, and also aware of the process enough that if I need to bring in a new person and train them, that I know enough about how the process works so that I can help them from in here and go, oh, actually this system's weird, you need to do this and this. So the best case scenario is when I get to put that stuff aside and just focus on that. And that's why you work with people that you trust to be able to go, you know, just sort out all the magic behind the scenes while you're doing this stuff. And they don't know all the things that I'm doing in here to produce the sound. They don't know that I might be holding my leg a weird way to keep one thing dormant. But all that matters is that we're both aware of each other's sides and that things can happen a certain way, and that we just kind of work on autopilot. So yeah, good question.
So the next question, Matt, that I have for you is Yolanda Johnson Young. The question is, Matt, have you worked on animation? If so, is the process or the experience similar to a live action movie?
It's, you know, 90% or more the same, you know, maybe more than that. And because it up until the actual recording process, the entire process is the same. The biggest difference, I would say, is that you don't have any production noise to hide behind. There's no on-set noise to hide behind. Everything's been recorded cleanly with the dialogue, hopefully. So unless it's for a stylistic thing, that you're working in a void. All the sound has been added. And so for animation, there is the primary difference there is that you know that everything you do is going to be audible and doesn't immediately have something to hide behind. You have nothing to chase because there was nothing recorded on a set. So you can't go, how did the footsteps sound on this shot? Like in production, let's try and match those. It is all fresh. And so you do have more creative opportunities then to make it exactly what it needs to be. Obviously, like animation for the most part too, it's an abstraction on reality, and it can either be more realistic or very absurd in its abstraction. So as those interpretations on reality change, so does the Foley a lot of the time as well. We try to make it match or make sense. I tend to want things to have more body and just more color and character when we're doing animation stuff, because if it's been done, the animation's been done well, then it's asking for that validation through sound. So we just did a really great animated piece that just hit YouTube called A Night at Camp Heebie-Jeebie, which is great. And that was chocked full of like little details and heavy sounds and stuff like that. So yeah, the animation process is super fun for Foley. Yeah, just like getting to disobey reality is a nice thing to have sometimes.
That's a great way to put it. We have a repeat question because I missed it. I'm sorry. It's from Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. Matt, what do you think of Foley sounds in podcasting? Ooh, great. Does it do a story disservice when it's missing? Can storytellers overdo it, or is it too much, or is too much never enough?
Yeah, I mean, podcast sound design is it's turned into it's been a thing for a while now, but it's turned into a huge thing. I'd never done podcast sound design, and then this year, I think because of COVID, it's so much easier for people to produce audiobooks and podcasts that are cinematic, because it's easier than filmmaking. And I think filmmakers are taking these opportunities to learn the new medium, because you can make things cinematic and visceral and everything without having to risk the kind of health safety of your performers. Everybody can be isolated and remote, and it doesn't matter where you are. So no, I think it's great. But I would say that the risk of overcrowding the sound, that's something that happens in all mediums that require sound to function in storytelling. I think that if you look at like a Transformers movie, man, it takes a lot for critics. It takes a lot of mistakes with the sound for critics to criticize the sound or even mention the sound, right? And that's what I remember of a couple of Transformers movies, just being too loud. So at some point, and too busy, too chaotic constantly. So that's doing a disservice to other things that might be happening where maybe not enough restraint was used. So you have to kind of, I think, what I see that's probably the same for podcasts as it's the same for films is filmmakers being afraid to let the film speak for itself, right? Trust your characters, trust the emotional storytelling. Think of the audience is going to experience this probably once. If you're lucky, people will watch your film multiple times. That's, I think, a blessing for filmmakers, right? But for the most part, a film is going to get watched once. And so you have to think about what the audience reaction is going to be for that and trust your kind of instincts. So, less is more, yes, but sometimes you also need more. And that, you just kind of have to make that decision. I think that, because in podcasts, you have some sense deprivation because you're just listening. You're much more in tune to what's going on. You don't have visual distractions potentially. So you have more opportunity to be subtle but then also detail things. So I think it's just about making kind of conscious decisions there. But it's a huge, there's been a huge boom in that industry, and we're about to get going on like a few podcasts that sound epic compared to a lot of films. So
I love
yeah,
it.
I mean, I think it's a great new medium to
Mhm.
be able to really like show the power of sound in storytelling. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm so sorry, everyone, the questions that we couldn't get to. We are running out of time. Matt, thank you so much for your time. It was such an amazing masterclass in its true sense, sound from scratch.